We've done a lot of conversations. I'm a product developer, and production manager. So, I've talked to you about how to build BOMs, how to run a fitting, what goes into development from start to finish, getting yourself production ready, how to scale for costing, things like that. So you can go back to Facebook to see our previous lives. But today I thought, to talk about fabrics, because most of the people we meet through Maker's Row, you come from other world experiences. You come from different professional backgrounds. And I can imagine that it's pretty hard to come to this industry without any language or any kind of the jargon or any of the technical understanding. So I thought this would be a good time to talk about fabrics so that you kind of knew what you were looking for when you are thinking about your designs. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I'm going to try to keep this to 20, 30 minutes. And then after that, I will, if I don't get to your question, I will stop and answer in ends of segments. So, okay, so so fabrics, there's knits and there's wovens. Before we even start the difference between the two, I want to talk about fibers. So a lot of times people will come to us and say like, oh, I want this in silk. So you're telling me what fiber you want it in. You can say, I want this in cotton, I want this in silk. I want this to be spandex. That's the fiber. Most of the time when people are talking about silk, when they say, I want this to be in silk, what they mean is usually it's a woven fabric. Silk comes in crepe de chine, which is kind of matte and has a texture. There's georgette, which is like much more textured and kind of sheer. There's chiffon, which is truly sheer. There's charmeuse, which is like a satin. You can call it satin. So when you say, I want silk, I assume you mean you want a woven fabric made out of silk, but I still have to differentiate what kind of fabric. So that's why I want to kind of just go from fiber to what types of fabrics there are, and then from there talk about actual fabrics. So we've got natural fibers, we've got synthetic fibers, and then we've got a category called natural man-made fibers. So natural fibers are things like silk, cotton, linen or flax, hemp. They're starting to do, I think we could stick to those four for now. I'm not going to call bamboo a natural fiber, and I'll tell you why later. But then we've also got our synthetics, right? We've got nylon, spandex or lycra. We've got rayon. So those are your synthetic fibers, excuse me. And then you've got the category natural man-made fibers. Those are tencel, lyocell, modal, Cupro, and also bamboo rayon. So usually with natural fibers, you literally, the other one for natural fiber is wool, right? So usually with natural fibers, you go and you can just like shear the wool, and you could, if you wanted to, you could just spin it into a yarn. We go through more processing than that days, but the gist of it is that it's literally just a fiber being spun into a yarn. To synthetic materials, those are made in laboratories. So when you hear things like moisture wicking or antimicrobial, things like that, you can take polyester, it's pretty nerdy, but you can take polyester and it can be in a triangle shape, the actual fiber, the actual thing that's being spun into yarn can be made into a triangle shape, it can be made into a star shape, whereas usually, silk, it's got like, it's like a strand of hair where it's got like little bits of like little fibers that stick off of it. Silk, the reason why it's shiny and so smooth is that those little tiny ridges are really, really microscopic. Cotton has bigger ridges, wool has gigantic ridges. But with polyester, they can actually make the shape of the yarn specific. And when there's like a star shape, that makes it have this moisture wicking property. That means that there's space when they go to knit the fabric together or weave the fabric together. Because the yarn shape is the way it is, there's space in between the where moisture body can leave your body because there's little holes. So that's something special. So when you think of like 1960s, if you ever have like thrifted or worn like a polyester pair of pants or something, and you're like, why would that be moisture wicking? That's because in the early days, or some traditional polyesters, they're just spun to mimic cotton or silk, or, you know, it's like a strand of hair, like a shaft. But with the newer technology, polyester fibers can be in triangles and diamonds and stars, and that will give you some of these properties you're looking for. So when you get active fabrics, generally speaking, just so you know, those fibers are made into a different shape. So spandex and lycra are the same thing. It's just a brand or not. And then you've got your nylons and rayons. So those are your synthetics. Then natural man-made fibers. This is a really interesting category. They're considered eco, but the reason why they're called natural man-made is because, so I'll start with tencel and modal. These are fabrics that are made from wood pulp, usually either eucalyptus or birch trees. So it's not like if you just take wood and you pulverize it, that it's going to, you can then spin it into a yarn, right? It has to be treated with chemicals, usually like ammonia or bleach or things like that, to get the pulp to kind of like gel, so to speak, so that they can then spin it into fibers. One of my favorite natural man-made fibers is called Cupro. Cupro is great. It takes leftover, basically the excess of cottons. It can be like small fibers that didn't make it into the spinning. It can be like little pieces of leaves and some stems. It's the excess. And they mix it with ammonia, and then it comes out and it makes this beautiful silk alternative. Cupro tends to look the way like water washed silk, if you're familiar, it looks. And it dyes amazingly. It's perfect for garment dye. It's one of my favorite fabrics, and it's not too commonly known, but Cupro is usually woven. So now I want to talk about the difference between knits and wovens. Generally speaking, with like tencel and modal, you usually see those in knit fabrics. Knits are like jersey, that's like your t-shirt fabric. It can have stretch or it doesn't have to. Then you've got rib, which is usually like on the collar of your t-shirt, or maybe when you have a thermal, like on the cuffs, on your sweatshirt, it's the cuffs. Before there was actual spandex or lycra, rib was knit to stretch and recover. So it's just like jersey. It has a jersey stitch, but it goes like one strip of the yarn sticking out and then one strip of the yarn going back, and then another jersey stitch going out and then back. And because of that, it creates this rib effect, so that when you pull it and it'll go right back to its shape. There's several types of ribs. Usually on t-shirts, we use a 1x1. Baby clothes, like a baby onesie, is almost always in rib. And then for sweatshirts, you can usually use like a 2x1. For bombers, things like that, you can do like a 2x2 or a 3x1, and it makes it chunkier. Now, don't want to go too much into ribs because there's a lot to talk about here, but ribs are generally knit really narrow. So most of the time, if you were to stand a roll of fabric up, it would be like 50 inches or sometimes 19 inches wide. So narrower it's going to likely be. So if you see a bomber, we have these little tricks that we do, like in front of the zipper, there's usually like a little square on each side. And then sometimes you'll also see a seam on the side. That's because your ribs are super narrow when it's chunky. So we put those little square panels at the base so that it looks like, you know, your sweatshirt can go all the way, or your bomber can go all the way down, and you can put snaps or whatever, and it's all on the same fabric, but it also helps because your rib is narrow. So just keep that in mind with ribs. If you ever want to use, like, there's, you know, like, especially like those kind of like tank tops that are made out of ribbed or things like that, it can be expensive if you use a narrow fabric. And the reason why ribs are narrower is because the way that they're knit, it's like taking up more space on the machine, so it shrinks the width. Okay, so you've got your jersey, you've got your rib. Then you've also got, in the knit family, you've got your fleece. These things are terries, loop back terry, French terry, sweatshirt types of fabrics, and also then fleece back. The front of the fabric can also be brushed. So these are kind of your core knit families. And I want to differentiate the difference between that and a knit sweater. Sweaters are not made of fabric. Sweaters are made of yarn, and in the same way that the fabric is made, it's one piece of yarn that's wrapped around itself, that's knit around itself, but it's not fabric. The sweater is made from yarn, and it's called fully fashioned. It's made into the sweater itself. T-shirts, sweatshirts, thermals, Under Armour, things like that, base layers, tank tops, anything that's kind of in that fabric that, you know, feels like it's a knit fabric, those are cut and sew knits. Now, I want to talk about stripes in knits. The way knit fabric is made is they take one strand of yarn and it's knit around itself. So on woven fabrics, you have the warp and you've got the weft. There's two yarns that go one way on the loom and then the other way on the loom. On knit fabrics, they take one yarn and they wrap it around itself to make either the jersey or whatever, hachi. There's all kinds of knit types of fabrics that can be made from this one yarn. But if you want to have a stripe, the reason why stripes have high minimums is because they have to take one full, let's say it's going to be black and white stripe. They have to take one full cone of white yarn and they have to take one full cone of black yarn. And they'll say, let's say it's like a half-inch stripe. The knitting machine will do the white all the way until the half-inch stripe is made, and then at the edge of the fabric, it'll loop the black on, and then it'll do the black across for the half-inch. And then it'll switch back to the white, and it'll do the white for a half-inch. And these yarn cones have to be yarn dyed. So they literally take a big cone of yarn, and they put it in a dye vat, and it makes the color. When you do knits, something beautiful that's amazing about knits is it's really easy to garment dye. So you could take a natural yarn, a PFD is what we call it, prepared for dyeing, and you can have it knit into a jersey, you can have it knit into a fleece, you can have it knit into a thermal, you can have it knit into all kinds of different fabrics, and then you can take that fabric, cut it, sew it, make sure that there's an amount of shrinkage in the pattern, and then you dye it. And so you can have lower minimums when you garment dye. The other way you can get knits is there's a bunch of amazing stock service vendors who they pre-dye the fabric. So how they'll do it is it's called piece dye. They'll do it all with one natural color yarn. They'll make your fabric, and then they take those rolls and they dye the full roll into one color. They keep the stock and you buy the stock colors. So those are kind of the two ways you can get color in jersey or any other knit fabrics. But I wanted to point out about the stripe, because stripes have to be yarn dyed, and then, you know, they have to use one full cone of each color, whatever stripes you're doing. You're not just subject to your fabric minimums, you're subject to the yarn minimums, which are usually much higher. Okay, so now we're gonna go to wovens. Wovens are denim, twill, poplin. Wovens can have stretch too, all of your plaids, Oxfords, things like this. And the big difference between knits and wovens, as I mentioned, is that there's the warp and the weft. If you see what the loom looks like, just imagine yarns that go up and down, and then there's yarns that go across. The yarns across are what's being woven through the up and down yarns. And so when you get a stripe in a woven, and if it's not printed, you'll notice usually there's like a little bit of white underneath. If it's a black and white stripe, even in the black stripe, you'll see a little bit of white. And that's because of the warp yarns going up and down. It has to weave around it. And so with woven fabric, you can take, again, yarn dyed, the yarn has been dyed, and you get your white warp threads, and then you take the white and you can go weave in and out, and it'll make a solid white. If you want it to be striped, you have to do, on the loom, there'll be like a little bit of white yarns, and then there'll be a little bit of black yarns, and then a little bit of white yarns, and a little bit of black yarns. So it's high minimums because of the setup fee involved, and it's because of taking the yarn dyed fabric, the yarn dyed cones, and having to meet the minimum in order to make those colors. I see a question that is, I think, relevant, so I'm going to look at it. It says, plenty of stock service on your dyes too. You can also have yarn dyed salads, and believe it or not, piece dyed heathers, sometimes even dyed stripes that use something called dispersed yarns. Yes, that is true. I am not going to go into too much detail about that, but there's really cool things where like the way you can get a PFD heather yarn, it can have some poly, it'll be cotton and poly. And then when you dye it, it creates these two different colors because the polyester dye resists. So you'll do like a cotton dye on the fabric and then it'll be like two different colors. Same thing, they might do stripes with that same effect. But you can't say like, I want one stripe to be brown and one stripe to be hot pink and expect to dye that. You have to do that with yarns. So one thing I want to mention too is that on wovens, it's not necessarily, but usually it's easier to change the yarns going the up and down way. So your stripes will go along the length. It's pretty rare to have them go along the width of your fabric. Whereas on knits, that's actually how it always goes, is that because the way that they make if this is the machine, it goes one color, one color, one color, one color, switch, color two, color two, color two. So we're not going to talk about that too much here, but when you go to make, if you want something that's up and down stripes and your fabric has it along the width, your pattern and your marker have to be marked with the right fabric direction, just so you know. I see there's another question. I'm looking for fabric for my small eco-friendly line. I know what I want. The company I was working with is shut down due to COVID. Looking for lightweight gauze, jersey knit with metallic. We are not going to share vendors on these lives, unfortunately. Gina, I'm sorry, but you can look up stock service programs. There's plenty of places that, I don't know what you mean by gauze, lightweight gauze. Sometimes if you mean like almost like literally like cheesecloth, that's a little harder to find. But there are stock program fabric companies all over Los Angeles. There's Canada, there's Japanese ones that have offices here in New York. That you can find those at. Jersey knit with metallic lightweight gauze. I don't know what you mean, I'm sorry, but you definitely can find, there's plenty of stock service people. So if your other place closed, keep looking. Okay, I'm going to answer a couple more questions. Let's see, excuse me. Sorry, this is so awkward, scrolling through all the questions. Yeah, most companies haven't been very active recently. The COVID has really slowed everybody down, guys. Gina, with regards to can you hire us at Stateless? Yes, you can hire us to help you source hourly. No problem. I see another question that says, what type of fabric do you recommend for a fancy women's t-shirt? So again, so I hear fancy. What do you mean? You can knit silk. I love knit silk. It's like $40 a yard though. So a t-shirt takes like 1.5 yards, and then with the labor, it's going to be pretty expensive. Another great jersey would be modal. You can do, I mean, there's cashmere jersey. You can get real fancy. But if you're trying to sell something for less than like $200, stick with modals, tencels, lyocels, things like that. They have a beautiful hand feel, and they dye. I'm making a ponte. Do you recommend the lining be poly spandex or nylon spandex? Looking for some recovery. Okay, ponte is a great fabric to talk about. Ponte is a double knit. It means that they literally take like two jerseys and put them next to each other. They're like interlocked next to each other. I love ponte. It's a great contemporary women's fabric. You can make blazers with it. You can make jeggings with it. You can make a skirt. You can make this dress could be have made in ponte. I don't know why you want to line ponte though. I wouldn't line it. I don't, unless it's, if you're trying to make something modest, I would consider using something more like ITY, which is another jersey. It's super lightweight. It almost looks like the lining of a bathing suit. If you want it to be woven, make sure there's stretch in it, because, so here's a big conversation we should have. When you use knits and wovens together, they will fight. Knits, even when they don't have spandex in them, they have much more give. Some woven fabrics have what we call mechanical stretch, which would usually be found on the bias. You'd stretch it like this, and it would stretch a little bit. Like a nice snappy poplin for a shirt is not going to have like much mechanical stretch. So in this question here, Ponte, even if it doesn't have spandex in it, which it usually does, it's usually like a rayon cotton spandex or poly nylon spandex. It's going to stretch. So if you put a woven lining in it and you don't put stretch in the lining, they're going to fight with each other, and there's going to be puckering and pulling, and it's going to look terrible. Now, if you use a stretch lining, you still want to make sure that it has maybe even more give than your Ponte, because for me, I don't know what the skirt is. If it's like a skater type of skirt or like a circle skirt, I guess you could line it. But for me, I don't see why you would need to line Ponte unless it's like really thin. But I would recommend going with a jersey. I would recommend going with like an ITY or something else. I would not go woven there. If it's a really structured like office type of skirt, you could go with some stretch, like maybe it's like stretch satin in poly or nylon, but you're going to want it to have at least it's going to need more than 2% spandex. And usually with woven fabrics that have more than 2% stretch, it's going to be like an active wear kind of fabric, and it's going to be kind of funky. So I hope that helped. But very good point, because we always have these fighting situations. So you make a cool blazer out of woven fabric, but then you want to use like a sweatshirt fabric on the inside. Your customer, after they wear it a couple times, there's going to be a big old bubble of the sweatshirt fabric from the lining poking out at the bottom, because the way that the woven fabric needs to fit cute is different than the way the jersey is going to be cut or the sweatshirt fabric is going to be cut. So you really want to lean on your pattern maker there. If you're trying to do this yourself, if you're with us, we talk about this all the time. It's going to fight, and we find ways to work around it. You can make your facing longer. There's other ways to do it, but for the most part, you kind of want to avoid mixing. I see another question. When pricing these items, what system should I use to calculate expenditure, wholesale, and retail sales? We're going to talk about fabric today. I did have a whole conversation about costing. So if you would like, you could go back on Facebook and find that costing conversation. Fabrics, the way I do want to talk about this with vendors. So most of us here on Makers Row, we're going to want, and Embark Live, we're going to want stock programs. We don't really have the ability to work with custom fabrics. Keep that in mind. There's amazing stock program vendors who, what they're doing is they're working with the mills directly. They're saying, oh, we love this Tencel jersey. We want it in these. They develop the colors, and they buy the minimum. Let's say it's 3,000 yards. They buy that 3,000 yards in every single color, and then they sell it off to all of us. You don't have to worry about your neighbor having the same fabric as you, because you should be making different things enough anyways. We can all share the same fabric. It's no big deal. Even novelty stuff. You really you should be making things that are so different from other people. Otherwise, you should have like a conversation with yourself about your business. If your business is looking like other people's and it's in threat because somebody's using your same fabric, we can talk. We can help you make your line more diverse. But so they're doing you the favor in a way. They're sitting on, you can just buy one roll of fabric. This is excellent. This is a great way to work as a small business. Let's see, hold on. Okay, I'm back. Excuse me. So some people can, they'll focus on silks, they'll focus on woolens, things like that. But working with stock programs is definitely what you want to do. You don't want to customize. If you do want to customize, you might want to work with prints to start. There are, Gina, there are fabric shows that you can attend to find these vendors. There are excellent fabric shows. Obviously, right now we're not doing in-persons, but I'm seeing that there's virtuals. I wouldn't recommend going to Tex World for any size brand who's going to be looking on Makers Row. Tex World is really, it's really oriented towards large, big corporate business. So they're usually the easiest ones to find. I'm not going to give you any shows that I do recommend going to, but I will say that I don't recommend going to Tex World because of the size of your brand at the moment. I'm going to keep answering questions. Let's see, excuse me. I'm new in design and trying to learn more. Can you also discuss fabric sourcing? Yeah, so we did talk about sourcing. That's actually the first live I did, but I do want to say sourcing is the hardest part. You want to have your vendors in your back pocket. You want to build up your fabric library, and you need to know the difference between knits and wovens, which is why I'm talking about it. So I didn't go into great detail, but you know, it doesn't discredit you if you say, oh, the way the fabric is woven together, when you meant that the way the fabric was knit together. But the more you know and the more you understand, or at least the more you know that you don't know, the better off you'll be, because you want to make relationships. This industry is relationship based. And if you come in and you say you know what you want, and then you kind of use like the wrong language and you represent yourself in one way with your attitude, but in another way with the things that are coming out of your mouth, people aren't going to want to help you. They're not us, but in general, like the fabric people, they want big orders. They want people who are serious, and they're just not going to take you seriously if you don't know. Now, there's plenty of us who don't know that you have to start somewhere. So don't let that stop you, but just know that, the fabric is kind of the very first place you need to start. And it's good to know the difference between a knit and a woven. And if you don't, ask when you see it, say, is this a woven? Like this fabric, for example, I think we would probably all ask each other. The fabric I'm wearing, I know you can't really see it, but it's quite stretchy. I'm pretty sure it's a knit, but it's like kind of like usually fancier fabrics tend to be woven. So it feels like it could be a woven, but I don't think it is. But so how you want to do it is you really want to build your library and keep these cards on hand. And you generally, how we organize it is by vendor. And I do it by, here's the wovens, here's your tech wovens, which is like stuff that you would use for, active wear, rain gear, things like that. So I separate our folders into like one vendor, wovens, tech wovens, and then knits. I'll do usually jerseys and ribs. And then I'll do like all of the kind of sweatshirt fabrics, like fleeces and terries and their corresponding thicker ribs. And then I'll put thermals in one place, and there's another fabric called hachi that's a knit. It looks like sweater fabric, but you cut and sew it into sweater. So, organize your fabrics. And then that way, when you're going to design, you can assign your fabrics based on your library. Let's see. Please let me know who I can speak to. Makers Row hasn't helped me find manufacturers as advertised. Hi, Joe. I'm sorry. I don't work for Makers Row. I work for Stateless. I think you should contact Makers Row, though. If you want our help at Stateless, we do design, development, and production, and you can reach out to us through our link there. But it's up to you to find the manufacturers. The way Makers Row works is it's a database essentially. It's almost like you search for factory in LA, you search for a factory in New York, you search for t-shirt factories, and it's up to you to contact them. And if a lot of people who haven't been working don't contact you back, that's not necessarily on Makers Row. It's that the vendor that you reached out to is not currently working. There's plenty of factories open now, though, so you guys should be able to search Makers Row and find people who can help you. We are experts that help you. We're basically like if you were how the corporate fashion world works or the professional fashion world works, where we have a designer, we have a creative director, we have a tech designer, we have product development and production managers who can help you with sourcing, with sketching, with making sure your tech packs are correct, with factory pass-off, things like that. And again, just to circle back on why we're talking about fabrics, is that I do think that there's some stuff that you should try to come to the table with a little understanding. And I think fabrics are a really fun place to start. Lace is knit, and some laces can be stretch and some can be non-stretch. Lace can be very expensive when it's made of silk. It can be very expensive when it's non-stretch. So, these are the kinds of things that, if you like a fabric, like once you do start sourcing and you go to like a show, like a textile show, and you get your headers that you like Google it, Google what's a jersey fabric, like what's a terry fabric, and get to know how these fabrics work, because it'll help you. A lot of designers we do find like to work once they see the fabric is how they decide. Some people like to think of like the concepts and the silhouettes. But fabric definitely helps, because also I can't, like, if you wanted to make this dress in a poplin, we would have to put zippers on this sleeve. Otherwise we would have to make, or buttons or something. Otherwise we would have to make it a lot less tight, right? This is super tight if we wanted to do it in a woven. So I can't help you fully flesh out your designs. Our team cannot flesh out your designs until we know the fabric as well. If we had sketched it like this and then you showed us like a poplin, like a sheet kind of fabric, and we'd say, oh, okay, well, we can use that because it'll hold the sleeves really well, but we need to add a closure to the sleeve, things like that. Let me see. The metallic that may be a knit that has a bit of lurex in it. Don't know what they're saying. Oh, knit. Oh, I see, Joe. So you're saying that before you purchase the subscription. So again, there's a free version and you can find manufacturers. And if the manufacturers aren't answering, it might be because you're on the light version. But if you have the full Maker's Row, you should be able to be meeting your manufacturers. People just keep writing people, finding the right places. And it's an amazing database of factories. Yeah, so Nicole is saying that gauze is woven. That's what I was saying, is that, Gina, I don't know, usually gauze is not a jersey knit. Jersey knit with metallic. If it's a gauzy fabric, it's probably a jersey, and it has lurex yarn in it. Lurex is the metallic yarn, and it's just like a really open knit, like loose. I wish I could help you, but yeah, you can call us or find us on Maker's Row, and you can show us what you mean, and we can help you find that. Someone else said, don't line a Ponte too. Okay, here's another question. What's the highest quality of cotton poplin you've seen? Like one, say, in a luxury designer dress, say Valentino, the finest cotton poplin I've seen are in the $30 to $40 range. That's super expensive. Cotton poplins can be really nice, and they're like $7 a yard. You can get good poplins for $3 a yard. You usually have to buy a lot to get it at $3 a yard. So if you're paying $30, $40 a yard for cotton poplin, it's probably a sateen. It's probably got a really high thread count. Turkish cottons are beautiful. They're hard to come by in the States because we don't really stock a lot of Turkish cottons. They have high minimums. Egyptian cotton, as we all know from sheets, also beautiful. They do tend to focus on home products, home fabrics, home furnishing fabrics in Egypt. So those, again, are kind of hard to find. There's amazing Japanese poplins that are more like $14 a yard. $30 to $40 is crazy expensive. Like that's more expensive than silk. Silk is like, the silk industry is suffering so much right now because between like global warming and the mulberry worms not having the same environment that they're used to, and then the disinterest in the youth generation of, being this like either farmer or spinning the yarn or working in the textile industry. A lot of people are moving on to technology in the regions where silk is traditionally made. Silk is the supply is really low and the demand is still kind of high. So silk is becoming super when I first started, in like 2000, silk was like $6 a yard, and that same exact quality right now is $17 a yard. So $30 to $40 a yard for poplin is, I feel like that's outrageous. I mean, I don't think Valentino uses that. I feel like you could get a really good Japanese poplin for $14 or less. Okay, so Isabel is saying the reason that she wanted to line the Ponte skirt is that she doesn't want panty lines to show. Even when you line it, it's going to have panty lines. When you line it, your liner is going to ride up, and it's going to make even more bunching. I really don't recommend lining a Ponte skirt. I think that your customer, if they don't want to show their panty lines, they should either wear seamless or a thong. Cashmere jersey is lovely. Yeah, it's a pencil skirt. I really wouldn't line it. I really wouldn't. You're going to see more problems down the line. The underwear lines are that's not an issue compared to the kind of issue you're going to find when you line your Ponte skirt. Can you name a contact to speak to about a refund for Makers Row? I'm sorry, Joe, I don't work there, so I don't know. But I do know that you should be able to find plenty of resources on Makers Row. And so if you're not happy, it might be like, I'm not saying it's a user error on your part, but I think there might be a misunderstanding, and they'll definitely help you find what you're looking for. Let's see. So good considerations about lining. Thank you. No problem. Okay, this is a great question. We didn't talk about this too much here because I was trying to focus on fabrics. And of course, I'm already in 40 minutes. I'm always supposed to do 20 and I always go long. I did talk about shrinkage and garment dye a little bit in another live. Before I answer your question, I'm going to read your question, and then I'm going to say something else, and then I'll answer it. So, is it always recommended to do a shrinkage test pre-production, even a standard woven cotton? My factory was hot pressing all the production pieces, which caused the cotton to shrink and be off fit. So, shrinkage is a huge deal, guys. There's a lot of woven fabrics that are pre-shrunk. It will say if it's pre-shrunk. 100% cotton tends to shrink a ton, but so does Cupro, silk shrinks, all kinds of stuff. I mean, all kinds of fabrics shrink, but a hot press and having it shrink, that really sucks. Sorry, I'm in New York, it's loud. We don't do shrinkage tests on everything. That's an issue with your factory, and they might have just been using too hot of an iron, and these are the kinds of headaches and problems that can arise from just doing production. It's just like one of the many headaches you have. For the most part, the factory was probably using an extremely hot iron because of the kind of pressing that they wanted to achieve. And they don't hold themselves responsible for shrinking something based on the pressing that needs to be done in order to get your product out correctly. So if you're working with cotton, I'm not sure what the product was or what, if it was jersey or what, and I don't know how your product development went, but we should have seen that in product development. They should have been pressing it at the same heat. If you're changing factories and they change the heat temperature, that's a problem. But for the most part, just remember that a lot of fabrics shrink, and that, you know, if you're doing your product development in the same place as your factory, those kinds of issues should have already been addressed in your development. I don't know why it wasn't. I'm only guessing that it was because you maybe worked with a sample maker and your sample maker used a cooler iron, and then you went to a factory and then they used their regular crazy hot irons that they use in factories. And that's why, and that's very unfortunate. I hope that it didn't make it a whole size different. But for the most part, always be careful because every cotton fabric shrinks unless it says pre-shrunk otherwise. Let's see. But I do want to talk about shrinkage for garment dye as well. Oh, hello, Suad. Suad works at Stateless. She says she likes my top. Let's see. So are knits and wovens literally the only two main types? Everything else is just different fibers and yarns. Correct. So there's knits and there's wovens, and that's it. That's all you can do. There's the two ways you can make fabric. Right now we have even when you sweater, do different kinds of weaves or knits. You can do a diamond pattern. You can do a PK, which kind of looks like how polo shirts look. That's all knit. There's jerseys, there's PKs, but yeah, that's it. Two different kinds, pretty easy. That's why I wanted to talk to you guys about it, because I feel like if you know this stuff, it'll help you, it'll empower you to come to the table with a little bit of knowledge, and also just help you guys just get a leg up to be, taken seriously by these old Garmento people who, aren't used to this kind of new era where we can all be fashion designers and entrepreneurs. Let's see. Does Stateless have experience with creating medical scrubs, and what type of wovens would you recommend? Yes, we do. I'm not going to name drop here on my lives, but we've worked with a couple household names in the medical scrub industry. You're going to usually just use a poplin. That's really like the stretch poplin, but poplin. Is the Los Angeles fashion district fabric considered expensive? Does Ponte shrink a lot? Okay, so Los Angeles fabric, if you go and buy, so that's actually, I will end on this. There's a difference between wholesale and retail with fabric. If you are in LA or in New York in the garment district, anything on the street level is going to be retail. In New York, some of those street level vendors do wholesale. Same in LA. There's this one woman, I love her. She's really not on street level. You kind of have to like go behind and like back through an alley, and there's like some car stereo place, and then you go in. But they sell to wholesale and they sell to retail. When you buy sample yardage, you're basically paying retail price, and then when you buy production, you get your wholesale pricing. If you're going to little stores on the street, you're mostly going to be buying retail. The reason we don't recommend that at Stateless is that we set you up here at Stateless, we set you up for a business, for a real brand. And you want to be able to reorder that fabric, and you want to be able to replenish a good selling item. And the only way you're going to do that is if you work with a wholesaler. Your wholesalers can get the same quality over and over and over again. There are instances where something is canceled, but it's because they've put in something else that's similar. But you should not have any issues with reordering your fabrics. And when you go into a store, you'll find this really cool fabric, and then you won't ever be able to get it again. So that's a big problem. So not only is the cost different, but the replenishment is a huge concern. Let's see. Where would you say the finest linen is made? We've been looking for really nice ones from Japan, but looking to work with even nicer ones. Belgium is known for its linen, but Japanese linens, Belgium is going to be hard to find. They mostly work with home furnishings. Good linens come from Japan. Good linens come from India, China, Korea. We actually grow a lot of flax here, and we sell that yarn to mills all over the world. But it depends on what kind of linen you want. But I don't know what you mean by finer, but a lot of linen is really like stiff. Linen shrinks too, guys. Linen shrinks a lot. So if you're going to garment dye something, or if you're going to need to press something with a hot iron, definitely do a shrink test. And I'll tell you how to do a shrink test really quickly. You take a big piece of fabric, you draw a square at 10 inches exactly by 10 inches. You do a couple of squares all across, and you wash it in the hot water that you're going to wash the garment in, or you iron it on the hot iron. And then you go and you remeasure it. If 10 inches is now 9 inches on the width, that means that you have 10% shrinkage on the width. If it shrinks a little bit on the length, you just subtract that out, and since you did it in tens, it's really easy to calculate the percentage. It'd be 2% shrinkage on the length. You want to mimic whatever you're going to do to the fabric in your production process to determine what your shrinkage rate will be. Shrinkage is pretty scary. And a lot of times we have a lot of brands we work with who they'll just pre-wash the fabric beforehand just to not worry about it. Okay, let's see. SwatchOn, guys, there's a company called SwatchOn. They're from Korea. We had a client who worked with them. They're interesting. It's hard for me. I'm a little old school. I like working with a rep. I like having a vendor that I can talk to, that I can meet with, that I can go to their showroom. SwatchOn is a virtual thing. I'm not clear if they're really for me personally with the process that I'm using. I might just be being a curmudgeon, I don't know, but I've had a hard time with them. I prefer to work with my vendors. Let's see. Oh, good. Yes, nice linen is found in Italy. You are right. Classes of any type. We should do classes. We've talked about it at Stateless before. We haven't done it yet. Yeah, so yes. Okay, so variety of swatches. Yes. So someone's asking, where can I get a variety of swatches if I'm undecided as to what I want? So here's a method. You can go to the retail level and you can cut fabrics, and then you can take that to somebody like your product developer like me at Stateless, and we would go into our libraries and match those. Or you could cut fabrics, have fabrics from your clothes, doesn't matter, and you could go to and you could bring those. And when you work with a wholesale vendor, they're not going to be funny about cutting swatches for you. They usually make like beautiful cards. It's like a cardstock, 8.5 by 11 with one big piece of fabric on it, and then all the colors that are offered. The silk vendors, they're kind of like, meh, they'll just cut a piece off usually, because they don't make big cards like that for silk. But you should be able to collect. We have a gigantic library at Stateless of fabric cards, and that's how we work. I mean, and it's been great for us during COVID because we have this library. We don't have to, even when our vendors were kind of minimally working or their warehouse wasn't open, we could still like assign fabrics, and we were trucking right along because we had this beautiful library built out of fabrics and fabric vendors. Sports jersey fabrics, you can look on Makers Row. There's plenty of amazing stock programs. There's a lot in Los Angeles and in Canada. Let's see. Oh, I'm so glad that string testing was great for you. What about an egg? I think you're asking about eco products. So natural fibers are your surefire eco way. A lot of vegans take issue with wool and silk. I personally have a difference of opinion there. I think that, it is good to care about animal welfare, but natural fibers break down and biodegrade. And your alternatives that are so-called vegan are all polyester and PU and plastic, and it's terrible for the environment. It's terrible for humans. So your most eco-friendly ways are using natural fibers, and then your second most eco-friendly ways using the natural man-made fibers. Those break down just as easily. They're just the processes that they do undergo have some chemicals in them, so that's why they're not really eco, but they're still biodegradable and okay for landfills. Let's see. Yes, color map, standard color map, Pantone. So somebody just asked, is there a standard color map that I should use when designing fabric designs? Yes, Pantones. Get a Pantone book, get the TCX or TPX for fashion. You should always use that. And if you're doing printing, you should get the solid coated or uncoated Pantone books. Everybody in this industry, you guys should all have Pantone books. How do I find the stock programs? Go to textile shows and look for stock service shows. Sorry, that's my dog. Heavy denim. Let's see. Heavy denims. You're going to find great heavy denims from Japan. The Japanese denims are the best, period. Preview does cards with their silk stock and each type of silk, no color card, but yes, for their range. Yes, so Preview is a silk vendor that somebody just shared, so I will talk about them. They're here in New York. They have color cards, but again, they usually just cut a piece and then they have a card that has their colors, and you can get several different kinds of silks in those colors. My name is Courtney, and thank you guys so much for joining. That was the last question. I'm so sorry my dog is starting to bark, but I should go anyway. It's already 3:50. I always enjoy these. I'm not sure if this is going to be my last time doing it. It's the last one we have on the books for a while. Thanks so much for joining us. I love sharing my expertise, and I hope that you guys, I want you all to succeed and, set you up for success. So please look Stateless up. We can help you from little tiny projects like helping Gina find some gauze to, helping you design and develop and produce your whole line. So I will end with letting you guys know that I do think you can do it on your own. It's very hard. For you to do it on your own. And so we're here for spent too much time and money trying to do it on your own. That's what we're here for. And, there are plenty of factories back at work, and, it's a great time to start an e-commerce brand. So good luck, everybody. See you soon.